audience is that you're talking to them. I'm not in this. It's seamless. I'm never in this. You don't hear my questions. I only take the stuff that, out of all of this stuff, I'll take maybe 6 of the best things that define you, and we'll look at it together, okay? So the reason that I sit down here is that I want as close to the eye level of, you're looking into the lens as possible. I don't want, I hate it when people are trying to say something very personal and they're looking at the wall, or the interviewer. Now, let me just tell you what I want to do here and get your feelings on it.
You don't want to tell me in advance, do you?
Huh? No, not in subject matter, but I want you to think about something. I saw when you were talking to Marty Short, you said he was talking about why people fell in love with you and that you were so sweet, and you said sweet is good, okay? And I think that if I could have my dream come true about this film, it would be to have you look the way I see you when you're with Danny. Like you talk about that child, not to make you look not like you're a wise and mature person, but like to see into you, to see that sweetness. There's nothing at stake here. I will send you all these tapes. We will look at it together. Anything that you don't want in this film doesn't go in the film. So it's not like a typical interview where somebody is waiting to kind of, show off or catch you or whatever. There's nothing at stake here.
Yeah, but I knew that when we first talked.
Okay.
So
But I just want to assure you of that. The only other thing that I'll say before I start is that a voiceover will say things like, Dean and Jerry were the biggest hits ever. When they were at this club, people were lined around the block. You don't ever have to say that. You'll say what it felt like, when you went off stage that first night.
Mhm.
Or, I really want the things that nobody will know unless you decide to tell them. And I want to construct something so that when people look at this years from now, they know. It's kind of really knew him because you never saw him. Nobody ever captured him on a film. You know what I'm saying?
the only film shot at Stan was when he was performing.
Right, exactly.
Are you going to be that loose?
Would you like me to be in, so?
Yeah, if you're going to have a foot.
Okay.
No, not that much.
Okay.
Nice.
There you go.
Okay.
Cool. Great.
I want to try this pillow.
Good.
For some reason, I feel like I'm Billy Barty in that chair. This may be too high, but we'll see.
Well, you can see. We can all see. Yeah, that's good.
Yeah,
Yeah, that's good. That's better. The eye line's
and we're
good
still
too.
at an eye line.
Right, it's a much better eye line.
All right, let's do it, kid.
All right.
We're rolling.
Let's talk about the first time you ever laid eyes on Sammy. Where you were. What he was like.
Let me see the year. Had to be 1950. Ciro's nightclub, Sunset Boulevard, Los Angeles. I went to see the Will Maston Trio. And I knew I was experiencing lightning in a bottle. His presence on the stage felt like there were fans that were pushing your body against the back of your seat. I hadn't had a feeling like that since I saw Jolson when I was 5 years old. At the end of the show, I went backstage to see him, and I had notes. He was young. It was a first big shot for them. And I had some notes for him. And I'll never forget his first remark. He said, "We haven't met yet, and you're monitoring me?" I said, "You're doing some things on that stage that border on genius. And then you turn around and you do some things on that stage that border on amateur." So I thought I would mention it to you, because you don't need the latter.
And you weren't that old yourself.
1950? No. I was 20, 25, maybe. But I had lived 3 lifetimes by then.
He probably had too.
Yeah, Sammy was, we used to tease one another about who started earlier. He started at 4, I started at 5.
But he had always worked with his family.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm sure that they knew what he was giving to the act, and I'm sure it was hard for him to get away from them. Joey told me that you helped him get away from them, that you took him to Side Devore, that
Mhm.
can you talk about
Well,
how you did that?
some of the notes that I gave him that first night were, you can't walk out looking like a bookie at a racetrack, which is what he looked like. I said, you have probably enough Vaseline on your hair to load up an Exxon Valdez boat. And when you're working with your father and your dad, they're not just performers, they're your father and your dad. You can't turn your back on them on the stage. It's demeaning and it's not theatrical or professional. So those were my notes. I also gave him a couple of ideas about transposing material. He did some wonderfully strong things too early and couldn't rise above them. Though he stopped the show cold, and it was an incredible performance.
Had he always been working with his family? Or had
Always.
he- always. From the time he was a baby.
From the time he was 4 years old.
And he was really a very good meal ticket from the time he was very little for them.
Well, they were devoid of any real talent. They were capable of performing and being his setup or his compadre on a stage where they were good to get him out there. It had a nice look. But
So
his talent was so humongous.
So did you go with him to Side Devore, or did you just send him?
Oh,
over?
God, yes. I took him to Side of Wars and got him clothes. Then, of course, the problem later on was that he emulated everything I did. If I went to a camera shop and spent $20,000, he'd go and spend 40.
Joey also told me that the story of your insisting that he be allowed to stay at the hotel in Las Vegas.
Absolutely. He and the Step Brothers, when we were playing Las Vegas. Vegas in the 50s was still pretty much like the Deep South, because that's who the high rollers were. And one night after a performance, I saw Sammy in his dressing room having dinner. I said, what the hell is going on here? He said, we're not allowed in the garden room. And the next dressing room was the Step Brothers. They were having dinner in the dressing room. So I went to a couple of my friends who ran the hotel, and I said, I don't think you've got a show at midnight, and it's a Saturday, unless you start adjusting some of your rules. The Step Brothers will eat in the garden room and go anywhere they want in the hotel. Or I'll do one of two things: not appear, and or have a press conference and let the rest of the world know that you're building this empire on the kind of stuff that we're trying to get out of this country. It was fixed.
You enjoyed using your fame and your power for the underdog, right? Once you got it, you started using
I've
it.
never used fame or power for myself, with the
But
exception if
for
I want it.
underdogs, you did.
Underdogs, of course, or people that are maligned or demeaned and have no recourse. I love to get on my white charger and knock down that son of a bitch that does that to people.
Is that something that you get something wonderful from, or is it something that you just feel an obligation of?
I had it as a kid in grammar school. If I saw somebody that was being unjustifiably treated, I had to do something about it. I didn't see anyone else doing anything about it. I always had to. I had a Holden Caulfield kind of a gut that drove me to do the things that I did. And I find that in my older years, and I look back, I feel a tremendous self-esteem for what I did, and talking about them sometimes diminishes them. And I'm not often comfortable about talking about the nice things that you do. You can talk about the great things you do theatrically, because that's part of that. It's part of that egotistical inner government that makes you a performer. But I was raised with so much love, and I do love people so much that if I can make their lives a little easier because of what strength I have, I'm not sure if it's a selfless act. I have a feeling it's a selfish one, because I get such pleasure out of seeing that they're not demeaned anymore.
Well, you also were able to translate a lot of the suffering that you had firsthand as a kid into something positive for other people. I mean,
Well,
you suffered a lot as a kid.
Yeah, and
living
the
in Irvington and being Jewish was almost like, I mean, there were no blacks there to persecute, so
No.
everybody chased the Jewish kids in those days, right?
Yeah, because we had the Nazi Bunds there. It was a hotbed of Bunds. But getting back to my need to do for others, I have always had a fair doctrine that ran through my blood, and that was, if I see a producer come and say nice to me and bumps into my camera operator or my sound man or my grips or my electricians and or doesn't even know their names, I'm going to teach him a lesson in manners. I'm very protective of the people I work with, because I know that they are and have been the unsung heroes of everything I've done. Without
Well,
them,
you're very protective. Your whole life is one of being very protective. You were very protective of your family. You've been very protective of your children. You were very protective of your own parents.
Yep.
I mean, that's true, right?
Yes.
I mean, once you were able to you did. I mean, 18, 19, however old you were. I mean, weren't
Well,
you a millionaire when you were 19 years old?
Oh yeah,
Had to be.
I was a millionaire a couple of times by 19 years old. But that was the time when Paramount brought an efficiency expert out to Los Angeles. And they thought it would be a good idea to get rid of the watchman on the west gate of Paramount Studios. Now, I grew up with this watchman. From the day I came to that studio, Jess was my friend. They dismissed him after 42 years, only because it was a bean pusher who picked the name out of the hat, and that was that. So I called Joey. I said, get a Mayflower moving van and have it parked outside my office. We're out of here. When the Mayflower van got there, and it was a humongous 18-wheeler, You could see it from Y. Frank Freeman's office. And I went in to see who was the chairman of the board of Paramount, West Coast. I went into Y. Frank Freeman's office. I said, "You see that truck, Frank? That's going to have all of my office and all of my staff. We're going to load it in and drive off this lot if Jess doesn't get his job back." And he looked at me and he said, "Well, I don't really understand. You bring this company $800 million in film rentals. Isn't that a larger issue than one man?" I said, "You're not listening to me. If you can't put the price on one man's life, 800 million doesn't mean a thing. And you didn't know it was happening, Frank. An efficiency expert has done this. And I'm expecting you to fix it so that I can pay this guy that drove this Mayflower truck, pay him a nice little gratuity, and have a truck depart from the studio."
But when you were a kid, would you agree with me that life was cheap?
Cheap?
Yeah, in the sense that I recall, I grew up in Jersey City, and I recall that people's parents would die literally from working. They just work themselves to death.
Did you say Jersey City?
Jersey City.
And now you're talking about dying? That's redundant.
Died already. I think what I'm trying to get at is kind of steer you into the reason I believe that there are a lot of reasons for your taking these tremendous interests like you've just described. I think that you were very affected by, as we all are, by our childhoods, that you lost people. You lost your grandmother when you were very young.
Mm-hmm.
Probably if you had been a wealthy family, she wouldn't have died of whatever she died of. I'm sure at a young age you saw all of this around you, and you made up your mind that if you could change that in your life, you would. I mean, I'd like you to. I'm very struck by your own book book you wrote about yourself. This picture of you and your grandmother, and you're saying, "I'm going to Hollywood," and she says, "Have a good trip." You know, things that people amuse themselves with in those days. Very profound relationships between grandparents and children, because for your parents' generation, many parents just couldn't be there. They were out trying to work just to try to stay alive. So the grandparents were really the surrogate parents to a lot of people.
Yeah, but my grandmother she was my Yale or Harvard, and I was only 7 or 8, getting the kind of wisdom that most young men don't get until they're 22 years old, going 4 years to the best college in the world. At 7 and 8, I was getting the wisdom of my grandmother.
And what was that? Was it about love? Wasn't really about facts, was it?
It was about participating in this life and recognizing that there were others participating as well. She never ever spoke to me about I and it. She spoke to me about I and them living in this world, and that the thems needed my attention, my affection, and my love, because I came here just like they did. She used to say to me, "If you can tell me that lady arrived on this earth any differently than you did, you can treat her any way you want." So when I needed wisdom, information, and articulation and profundity, I go to Grandma. She made me older than I was, because she was an apostle.
She also believed in you.
She believed in me passionately. I know that every time I saw her, that was for breakfast or at night, after school, she represented wonderment to me. It was like in Lost Horizon when they spoke to the Dalai Lama with the reverence that they had for him. That's what I had with her. Every day was an exciting experience at 7 and 8 and 9 because I'd be affected by what she said and her mere presence in my life. She was like nothing you've ever read about. She was like nothing that's ever been portrayed by anyone. The closest thing to her quality might have been Madame Curie, if at all. And then we'd be short about 600 pounds of quality.
So, I'm sure you've had the experience that things that happened to you in your childhood, you can remember, especially I'm sure things with her as if they were last week.
Mhm.
Things that happened 10 years ago, you don't even remember. I'll give you a year, you don't even remember exactly what you were doing in that year, right?
Well,
Is it kind of like that it
She was a
stays so
stickler
alive?
on getting my memory in place. She was a stickler on making me understand what a fantastic tool we had up above the eyes, including memory, taste, emotion, passion. She had a tremendous, tremendous awareness of the mind and the body of a human. And she used to draw quarter pictures on the kitchen table and show me where my passion was, where my memory was. And then she would say, when you play ball, keep your hand over memory. You don't want to lose that. And this is a woman that came from Russia, where you're not taught that kind of wisdom.
She just had it.
She just had it.
Kind of like you just had it. Do you think that she knew you had it? Do you think that she saw that you were going to do great things? Or do you think she just hoped that you?
No, she knew that I was going to do whatever I did in an exemplary form. She made it very clear to me that if I wanted something, I could have it. But that I had to want it badly enough to commit to all of what was necessary to do to get it.
When did you start saying goodnight to her in the nightclub act? When did that happen, and why did that happen? When did you start saying? I remember I saw you. I don't remember, but and people were saying in the audience, "Are you going to say goodnight to Sarah? Are you know, your people would say that, so they were waiting for it."
No, I'd say goodnight, Grandma.
Goodnight, Grandma. When did that begin?
In
Was that
television.
always with you?
In television.
Uh-huh.
Because she was so intrigued with it. And the thing that she loved about it was that when I did mention her, her days after the show were filled with fruit and flowers by those in the neighborhood that made her feel so terribly special, and she was so proud. That's the only reason I did it. It gave her days of pleasure and joy.
Now I'm a little confused because I'm talking about your mother's mother.
Yeah.
But didn't she pass away when you were very young?
She passed away when I was 11.
Right. So how were you able? You were only a child then. So explain what you're telling me.
Well, we had the kind of, it's very complicated.
It's okay.
We play acted and pretended so much. And I would do all of my crazy shtickler and everything else. And then I would tell her, and she would laugh and she would say, "That's wonderful." And she used to commend my body rhythm. She said, your father didn't have that. Your father stood more than you do. And I would do shows at the synagogue and at the community center. And I never finished a show without acknowledging my grandma. And all of the joy that she got from that, the pride that she got. And I was really struggling trying to find my way on that stage, but I never ever finished one without acknowledging, this one was for you, Grandma Sarah. Then, of course, then those days that she had after that in the community, she was just the queen of the May. But then when she was gone, I didn't even enter television until about 8 years after she had passed away.
That's right.
But I never ever referred to her like she had passed away. I referred to her like she was there watching. So that's probably what you're in reference to.
And that kept you going, right? Through all those years.
Well, I was so full of myself. I really didn't need anything to keep me going. I knew that I was on a track of doing good work, and that she had the faith and the confidence, and as long as I wanted it and I worked hard enough at it, I could get it.
Well, you know, a lot of people talk about the great comics, that the people that strike chords in audiences are really striking those chords because they're saying everything that you've experienced in your life, I've experienced too. I hurt just like you.
It's called identifying.
But very few people really connect that way, where then people just, they can't get enough of them because they're really, the performers acknowledging the people. It's a whole different kind of thing. When you were a child, I was saying to Joey, I know he had a very hard childhood. I was trying to think of the closest thing from reading all the stuff. And your childhood reminded me of kids that I've interviewed who were in foster care. I did tons of things on kids. Because they're always moving. They always had to find another place for Jerry, right? Because your parents were on the road. They'd take you to someone for
I was
a
a
week.
FedEx kid.
Right. And
I was shipped on Friday, delivered Saturday morning.
And there are, one little boy told me once, I never unpack my bag. I just keep it packed under the bed because I always know I'm going to move. And I'm wondering if you could talk about how you think that experience colored things that you did. I mean, how did that contribute to who you are? That feeling of uncertainty,
It contributed to my brain of comedy and my ability to create and be in part of that creative process. In that comedy, based on my gut and my psychological application to that form, is predicated on one thing: a man in trouble. That's what comedy is, that's what comedy should be, and if it's good comedy, you'll find a man in trouble. When you see a stand-up today, some young guy that's very glib, articulate, and sometimes profound on that stage, and he's into his cerebral combat with his audience, he's not in trouble. Therefore, he'll score and he'll be okay, but you'll never hear from him again in this life. These young people that are in our business today, that are in these stand-up clubs, and there's thousands of them, they all have tremendous careers that run about 17 days.
Well, they're talking to